Good morning. On the one hand, I am completely overwhelmed by living this life. And on the other hand, each moment I seem to be okay. I seem to know well enough what to do. I mean, I have no idea how I got here. I mean, in every way, I don't know how I got here. Why do I exist? It's like, and then it's like, it seems like within a blink of an eye, I'm 51 years old. Some of you think that's young, but Anyway, you get my point. It's like, within a blink of an eye, you realize you're 72 years old, or 84 years old, or what's happening? What's going on? I don't know, how did I get involved with the person I'm married to? She just showed up somehow, Now I have a child. Jeez. What's my responsibility in this life? What am I supposed to do? I sit here and I'm tasked with speaking to you in some meaningful way, and at the same time it's like, if I think too much about what I'm doing, it's like, is this the right way to practice, to teach, to realize wisdom and compassion, to liberate ourselves? It all gets really complicated. Now, that's just my personal life, but and I'm just touching on certain things. I find this world that we live in increasingly confusing, I'm trying to illustrate what I mean by feeling overwhelmed by living this life. I was born in 1971, and for my basically entire youth, there were no computers. I mean, not in any meaningful way in my life, like in terms of a personal computer. I mean, they started to emerge when I was a teenager, and some people got really into it, but I didn't. Now it seems like I can't live my life for an hour without the computer, whether that's my laptop or my phone. What happened? The communication that I'm involved in is just, it's overwhelming. I find it overwhelming. On the one hand, there's this elation that you can be connected to seemingly anyone, but on the other hand, that means the amount of communication is just increases to a degree where it becomes sort of like, how do you manage it? You ignore it, you get really selective, and then this weird internet social media environment we're in now, where it's like, where everything seems to be curated to fulfill a certain kind of image. Now I think we take it, we just treat it as kind of normal, but I look at every page, at every presentation as a kind of fake. Just my example as always. When people tell a story about their vacation, they tell the best possible story, and they leave out everything that goes wrong on the vacation. Like how bored they are on the vacation, or, how terrible the hotel actually was, or, whatever. But the vacation story is never the experience of the vacation. The experience of the vacation is always actually not that great. Well, many people feel after a while, maybe I should have stayed home, It's kind of demanding to travel, or... anyway, I'm just giving a flawed example. But all the images, and it's mostly images and videos, they're all very curated. And this is particularly described for teenagers now, right? It's like we fall into this comparative mind of like, there are all these lives out there that seem more interesting than my own, or they're more successful, or they're more shiny. What am I doing? Is this good enough, what I'm doing? Anyway, I think that adds to the overwhelm. It's like, what am I supposed to do? What's the right thing to do? And then, of course, the big stuff. I'm still speaking to how overwhelmed I am just living this life. Our collective activity is changing the climate, is the scientific consensus. And species are dying? I mean, I just can't get over that. It's like, not just individuals, but whole species, like life forms that have evolved over billions of years, disappearing forever. Because of the natural conditions that our collective behavior, we are in the process of changing these conditions, and so the conditions aren't there anymore for these life forms to exist. And it highlights how fragile our own existence is. It's like these conditions are so fragile. And this is the teaching of Buddhism and interdependence, right? It's like we emerge from these fragile conditions, so our own existence is that fragile. So we're involved in this collective behavior of, I experience it as a kind of striving that goes in some direction that we don't fully understand, It's like we're trying to live better, create more convenience, reduce pain, increase pleasure, that kind of desire, that strive. And in doing so, we are harming the conditions for life. That's overwhelming. There was a period, it seemed like, where there was some hope in the world for a kind of, there wouldn't be war between the great nation powers of our world, but it's like, right now it seems like that's disappearing. There's the war in Ukraine, of course, but there's also this sort of emerging still a Cold War between the US and China, competing for supremacy in the world. And it's a world that's stacked with nuclear weapons, right? Okay, we kind of forget that, but and then I think most people are not paying attention to this yet. There's this AI revolution, artificial intelligence. I just recently heard, somebody spoke about this survey that when the developers of artificial intelligence are asked, how likely is it that the development of artificial intelligence will kill humans completely, like eradicate, or harm so deeply that we wouldn't recognize life as we know it. I don't know, I'm laughing because it's crazy. As a median in the responses, like 10% of the people who are working on developing AI, on average, the people who are developing this artificial intelligence thinks there's a 10% likelihood that it will go completely wrong. It's like, what? And you are still working on it? Like you're spending your life energy to develop this stuff that in your own estimation has at least a 10% possibility of being completely destructive? Wow. Now, I can't go into this, but these scenarios of how this can go wrong with artificial intelligence, not to speak of like how it could displace, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people from doing work, they become just worthless and superfluous, replaced by machines. What do you do with all this information? Like, I talk with people fairly regularly about their state of mind and sense of anxiety, and sometimes people bring this up, any of these things, or all of them. And I feel it. I feel this, I feel a kind of trembling in myself. It's interesting, when you have a particular personal issue, this could be like a health emergency, or it could be just a personal challenge, like you have to change jobs, or you have to, you have to move, or you're going through a divorce, or you have a child. This event demands our full attention in a way, or much of our attention. And then the complications of the world just sort of fall away. Like you just don't have the energy or the wherewithal to take in all this information, so it just gets kind of like, I think some people live in this state more or less habitually, but with some deliberation of like, I can pay attention to politics, it's crazy. I have my life to live. In the meantime, of course, things are happening that influence us. If you don't look at it, doesn't mean it's not happening. So I just want to acknowledge how complicated and overwhelming our existence is. By the way, I'm not pessimistic, right? I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic. I came to that conclusion at some point. It's like, it just doesn't help. It's like both ways are ways to try to control the future with your own mind. It's like, it's going to go well. Well, really? How do you know? Oh, it's going to go badly. How do you know that? It's just a way to kind of comfort your mind or something that you know whether it's going to be good or bad. The truth is, we just don't know. It's really uncertain. I think optimism and pessimism are just ways to avoid living with the trembling of this uncertainty. Now, I said, on the other hand, I know how to live my life every day. Right? I know how to sleep. I get up. I can eat breakfast or not. Sometimes I watch myself. It's like I just walk around in some way. I go from here to there. I do something. It's like I find things to do. I find things to do that are quite satisfying. I stay somewhat informed enough about how to use technology. It's like to a degree that I can live my life, but certain things I just don't worry too much about. It's like I don't pay attention to it. I don't know. Seems okay. I like spring, it's like I can live with winter too, but it's a joy. See the flowers come up and hear the birds. I was worried that there are no birds in Boulder for the whole entire winter, like no birds. But there are some birds. I find it miraculous that somehow I move from situation to situation and sort of, without much work I have to do, a certain kind of, and I don't mean this in a sort of time management thing, way, it's like a certain to-do list assembles itself. It's like, this is important, need to pay attention to this, I'll take care of that. Sometimes it gets a little dense, and I have to sort it out a bit. But mostly I move through my life with a certain kind of, some level of I don't know what to call. I have no idea what to call that. Clarity about what matters. I make mistakes, I think like, I can neglect that, but then it comes back, like somebody calls and says like, hey, you can't neglect that. Like the city calls and says, hey, or sends a letter or whatever, you haven't paid attention to this rule that we have that comes with a deadline. Oh, okay. I'll do it. I don't want the trouble. Or I don't want to pay the money. So I'll make that more important. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, for some reason, we live our lives as like we live in this complexity. And we chart a path through this complexity. I think that's just the way it is. Like life is this way. It's situational. There's everything all at once, and when I try to explicate everything all at once, like I did in the beginning of the talk, right, it gets complicated. When I don't explicate it, it stays, the complication stays implicit within the complexity. Are you seeing what I'm saying? It's like there's a difference between complexity and complication. A complexity in my book, it's the way I talk to myself. Sometimes I share that and then it sounds weird. But a complexity is an undivided multiplicity. It's like all kinds of things are going on and they're all interdependently hanging together. They're undivided. And when you explicate the parts, the multiplicity, the individual pieces, you put them all out, you explicate them. And then you try to relate them to create an image of the complexity. Then it gets really complicated. You don't know what to think. It's too complicated. You can't name everything that's going on in a complexity and then define all the relations between all the parts. It's not possible. At no time can we have a theory of the world, because the world is always more complex than any description that we can give of it. So what you think about things is just what right now I'm calling that a description. So our job, in a way, in life is to learn to live with complexity and find a way to, as I like to say, carry the present forward into the present. The tendency of the human mind, as I see it now, is to want to explicate the complexity all the time, to understand, to make things explicit, meaning conceptually clear, and then to relate all these concepts and find an understanding. Now, when you try to do that with your own life, it fails. In my experience, it fails miserably. If you try to understand yourself in relationship to the world, as a teenager, I did have this question of the meaning of life. I don't understand the meaning of the question anymore. Like, what did I expect the answer would be? Like a sentence that sums up the meaning of life? Is that what I wanted? Or some instruction for what to do that is what? True forever at all times? I actually don't understand. I don't understand what I wanted. Maybe all I wanted was a kind of relief from complexity. It's like, I want to know the answer so I don't have to deal with the complexity that shows up differently all the time. In each situation, the complexity shows up differently and presents a new task. And a question like, what is the meaning of life, is trying to sidestep that, avoid it, like have some sort of general idea about it all or something. I literally don't understand the question anymore. somehow I think now that Zen practice, and this could be other practices. I just speak about Zen practice because I know this practice, and I'm not saying that other practices aren't similar, or maybe they're different, but so I'll just limit myself to how I know Zen practice. I think Zen practice is, in essence, it's opening the mind to complexity and finding an appropriate small step with that complexity. Not more and not less. And from a certain point of view, it seems too little to just hold your mind in a way so that you can take another step that moves the situation forward in an appropriate and that includes compassionate way, because this complexity always includes all beings. This is worth noticing. Complexity, the way I'm trying to speak about it, includes all beings and their interdependence. So finding a step includes all beings. So in that sense, compassion is an integral part of the path. So it almost seems like not enough, because can we just be satisfied with taking this next step? Carrying the present into the present? Like, don't we need to know more? Don't we need to, have a bigger plan? And on the other hand, it seems too much. It's like, really, you've tried to find an openness to the complexity of all beings. How are you going to do that? What's the mental posture in which we can have this openness toward the complexity of everything all at once? I think this is 4 weeks ago, I spoke about the Five Skandhas. And the Five Skandhas are kind of the most common teaching that you find in the sutras that the Buddha gave. The Five Skandhas are a way to experientially make clear what a human being is, what I am. And so the Skandhas say there is form, which is the materiality of the world, but not in some abstract physical way, like that a physicist would study. But we could say materiality that's capable of being sensed, because our sensory apparatus will only make a certain portion of the world appear. You see, there's lots of stuff that we don't have sense organs for. I assume that there is many things we don't know even influence us. In my mind, that's what I call the mystery. I mean, there's clear examples like certain frequencies of light that our eyes can't see, or frequencies of sound that our ears can't hear. Other animals can hear this stuff, we can't, like that. But what if there's like, infinite possibly stuff that we are not, that we haven't evolved to notice because it's not necessary for our survival. So we don't know the world, we only know the model of our world, and it begins with what appears through our senses. That's called form. And then we have a feeling about that. And then we have individualized perceptions. So the feeling, in my view, is something like you have a felt sense of this multiplicity of aspects in your life. You have this felt sense sort of all together just as a feeling. And then you can separate it into individual perceptions. And you can perceive an individualized thing as something. Like that's that. I just did that a lot in my talk, looking at that, defining it as this. And then there's conditionings, various kinds of conditionings of how when this happens, then that happens. This is a whole world of kind of habit patterns. And then we have consciousness, which is stepping away sort of from the whole thing and thinking about it. If you think of this as a pyramid, it's like the skandhas are describing how the human mind and body form, and then feeling is starting where the mind comes in, and then perception, how the body and then the mind become more and more narrow in a way, because it's like we explicate more. It's like at each step we're explicating more. I'm thinking of every animal as having at least like this second skandha of feeling. Every animal has that to a certain degree. They live in a world of form and they have a feeling. They go towards something or away from it, pleasant, unpleasant. But then it becomes sort of narrow. And in the way it becomes narrow, and in the way we're explicating the world, our world becomes complicated. The way it's not complicated for animals. I just see my cat lives in the same world, right? You could say. Well, she actually lives in a different world because she can hear things I can't hear, but so already the form that she lives in is different. Also, her body is different. She goes on, she walks on 4 legs, and she can just jump up on a fence. Like, if I could jump, like, I don't know, what is it? 5, 6, 10 times my body height, like just up. That'd be a different world. But I just don't see her living with the same kinds of complications that I live with. One of it is, for example, to explicate the knowledge that we will die. Cats seem to not have that. They don't worry about dying, so they will also not worry about nuclear war. If it happens, it happens. For the cat, not for us. Because we built this stuff and we have responsibility and so forth. So it becomes very narrow, and then what I think is happening is like we can begin to live just in the sort of top of this consciousness level. It's like we use form, feeling, perception, conditioning as a kind of platform to stand on with our consciousness, and then we make our life in consciousness. The other stuff is still happening, but we're not really inhabiting it. We have to deal with it because, like, say, a feeling arises and it turns into an emotion, and the emotion bothers us, and then how do we deal with it? We think about it. That's what I mean is like you're located in consciousness. You are thinking about what you're feeling, and you're trying to find a solution to what you're feeling through how you think about it. You think about yourself. It's like, why am I this person who has these kinds of feelings? Like, what is it about me that has this pattern? And how can I work with it and solve this problem that seems to be afflicting me? So the solution, in a way, that meditation brings when you use through the model of the Five Skandhas, I mean, there's different ways to talk about it, but would be to release your investment in this, like, I don't know, locating yourself in the medium of consciousness. Consciousness understood, and here I use consciousness as the ability to make distinctions. This versus that, good versus bad, self versus world, and so forth. So this simple meditation instruction of don't invite your thoughts to tea is basically an instruction to release our constant involvement with making distinctions. Stop explicating the world. Allow a part of your mind to function through these other modalities of the mind, these other, this way in which conditioning is like when one thing happens, another thing happens. It's like to begin to live in the way you make these connections, or the way these connections are operating, and that they are not solid. To enter into the world of perception, of using your senses and realizing that how you conceptualize things creates frameworks that then lead to conditionings. This all sounds kind of complicated, but as a practice, it would be like have the willingness. Like maybe certain practice circumstances are necessary for that, like a certain intensive. Have the willingness to experiment with just seeing colors and forms without making them into anything. Letting sounds wash over us and just have the enjoyment of the senses working, and then seeing how it turns into certain concepts and objects that we take for granted, like how these... I was walking with my toddler son yesterday in the spring weather, and there was the birds were tweeting. And I noticed how my mind wants to like point out birds to Matthias. It's like, you see the birds? But I couldn't see them. They were hidden from view. There were no birds. There was just the sound. I was turning the sound into birds, and I wanted to point out the objects, and then I noticed, oh, I can just hear the sounds. I don't need to turn the sound into an object. There's a wide feeling that comes with that. I don't know. You need to experiment with it yourself, but it's like the whole world is just sounding with bird tweets. They're everywhere in the sky. They're not limited to some object, some bird body. Music, I think, can have that, can bring that experience if you really give yourself over to the music, which doesn't mean anything. I'm thinking of classical music, it just expands you into space, and the space is just resonating with sound. It's wonderful, you're released from this object structure of the world. All right, and where I want to land is if we can release ourselves from these structures of consciousness, and they are progressing. The Five Skandhas are like a rough model of this, because there is complexity in that process, but the theory is simple enough and complicated enough that it gives a certain kind of picture of how we can practice. To let, I said it in this funny way, let a part of yourself function in this through just feeling. And I want to define this now as feeling complexity in your life. I call this felt sense, which is a term that comes from Gene Gentlin, but to accept that we actually have the complexity of the world, that it shows up in us as a feeling. When you allow the complexity of the world to show up in you as a feeling, meaning you have the world as an undivided multiplicity. This is what this Zen term of the 10,000 things actually means. It's a multiplicity, 10,000, and it's undivided because it comes all at once. And how do we have the 10,000 things? They show up in us as a felt sense. It's from the point of view of consciousness, this felt sense is very unsatisfying because it's very vague. It's very vague. It's not explicated. There's no detail in it, in the sense that, I mean differentiated details. So it's like we have to learn to be with all beings in this vague way. Vague from the point of view of consciousness. Do you know what I mean? It's not. There's no delineated clarity. But this felt sense is very precise in the way that you can know on a feeling level whether the step that you're taking feels appropriate or aligned with yourself and the situation. If it's not aligned, you can learn to feel like I shouldn't do this. This isn't the right thing to do. And this rightness has a certain precision. So the precision of this felt sense shows actually up in how you feel what this step is that you're taking. Is it, does it align with this overall feeling or not? Now, wisdom would be something like to follow the steps that feel appropriate and aligned, and to not take the steps that don't feel aligned. Even if your consciousness is saying, oh, this is the right thing to do, if it doesn't feel right in this, and I don't mean that in an emotional way, I mean that in, and this is maybe takes time to differentiate what an emotion is compared to this felt sense, don't do it. There may be a certain renunciation involved in that. And if you're not willing to renounce certain things, to not do them is what I mean, right? To not do something, to refrain from what you feel is not the good thing to do, then you live a life that's out of alignment. You will feel out of line with yourself. It's just inevitable. It's just what happens. Because you think this is the right thing to do, but you're not doing it from the way you have the complexity of your life. So sometimes I think this puts us, I'm not saying this is easy, sometimes this puts us in a real edge, like, what am I going to do here? Give this up? This relationship, this job, this kind of work, this action that I think I've always wanted to do, and now that I stand in front of it, I just feel like I shouldn't do it. And you have no explanation. You have no rational explanation for that. You have just this felt sense that is telling you not to do it. Or it's telling you that you don't know what to do, which is an uncomfortable, for many people, an uncomfortable place to be in. But what if we just were willing to embrace the not knowing what to do, and if you don't know it, don't do it until you know it. Find a way to wait. Meditation practice can begin with, not inviting your thoughts to tea, releasing yourself out of this obsession of a modality of mind that needs to make distinctions and understand everything. And that doesn't mean, you want to become ignorant or a person who doesn't think, but it leads to not believing in, your own personal ideologies. If you have a thought, it's sort of like put parentheses around it right away. It's like, yeah, maybe. Because whenever you explicate something, there is this other side that you're not looking at. But in this, if you reverse the triangle, in these more lower realms of the skandhas, in this feeling and form skandha, the distinctions blend together into this undivided multiplicity, and the other side that you don't look at when you have explicated something is still included. This is really marvelous. But it can be disorienting, because then it feels like you don't know anything. You can't be certain. I want to be certain about something, but no. It's like in that modality of your functioning, you can't be certain about anything, and you can't form ideological positions or know who you are or what another person is, or you really don't know that. And so that is an openness. There's an openness to complexity and a renunciation of explicit knowledge. All right, I'll let that be enough to say, and I hope to we can have a conversation about it. Thank you very much.